Dr. Eric, the fitness physician. I'm going to continue to do a long multiple series on various topics related to testosterone and hormone optimization, specifically as it relates to cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular disease prevention. As I talked about in a previous video, this is the number one killer of men and women, and we're going to talk about ways to mitigate this and improve this in multiple ways. We're going to talk about other things too, nutrition, dietary changes, etc. I definitely obviously want to talk about hormone optimization as well. So what we found is that obviously, and more people are aware of this today, that inflammation has a massive contribution to many things related to health and definitely to cardiovascular disease and more. So inflammation is involved in abnormal problem. People have gut issues, microbiome disturbances, Alzheimer's, basically pretty much is related to every chronic disease out there. And we've talked about this, have known about this for a long time. Today we'll talk about specifically about cardiovascular disease. Basically, again, inflammation, many pathways, but it has to do in general with tissue. Our tissues, how they adapt, the adaptation to changes in metabolic function or changes in metabolism. In other words, things that happen based how our metabolism adapts to dietary changes, to the foods we put in, to the stress in our body, etc. We have to adapt to that. Inflammation can affect this, and our tissues have to adapt to this. And if there's excessive inflammation, this can have an abnormal adaptation. Our tissues cannot keep up, or they do things the wrong way. In other words, for example, if you're eating junk food, and your body's going to start creating more free radicals and more, and secondary inflammatory changes is not going to adapt as well. There's a whole conversation in and of itself, but the bottom line is that inflammation is one of the root causes for these abnormal tissue adaptations. If there's too much inflammation, too much of the bad stuff, not enough of the good stuff, right? Our tissues, our cells aren't going to respond, and they're not going to function. They can do it for a while, but eventually it's going to catch up, and they're going to start misfiring. It's kind of like feeding, putting a cherry Kool-Aid in your gas tank, right? Maybe it'll fire for a couple seconds, and then it's just going to die. It's going to sputter, right? So if you're putting in bad junk and bad toxins and inflammation, your cells are going to start breaking down. Our bodies are pretty damn adaptable. They can do a lot of things, even with, like I said, with junk food and everything else. They can do it for a while, but eventually it's going to catch up. Things are going to start breaking down. Cells are going to break down. Tissues are going to break down, and eventually the organs are going to break down. And that's the big problem. So that's what we're trying to prevent, right? So, for example, in metabolic syndrome, there's just to back up a second, in some of my other videos I talk about the cellular metabolic pathways. I talk about peptides and how we're trying to fix things at the cellular level. We talk about the inflammasome and all those things like NAD and AMPK and all these cool things. Well, this is kind of how it all ties in together. We talked about the inflammasome. When things get out of control and the cell's not functioning, you get these inflammasome. Basically, the cells become dysfunctional. They can turn into inflammatory. They can become senescent cells, produce these inflammatory markers, which create other inflammatory cells, and you get this product that turns into what's called the inflammasome. It's just these dysfunctional cells that are spewing out these inflammatory enzymes and proteins called cytokines that can cause further damage to other cells, and then that spreads, and that's why our tissues age and we get old and things break down. So not just related to the world of peptides, but hormones. It's all basically relating the same thing related to cellular medicine. So when you get dysfunctional symptoms, when you're getting pre-diabetic, when you're getting metabolic syndrome, starting to get these things, this is why. So there's activation of this innate immune system. I talked about the innate and the adaptive immune system. It's your first line of defense, right? And you get basically this innate immune system gets turned on excessively, starts spewing out too many bad cytokines. This can lead to increased risk of diabetes and all of its complications, as well as further aggravation of metabolic syndrome. Say you're on the border, you don't have metabolic syndrome yet, but you're going down that road. You're unhealthy, you're having some issues, you're having some symptoms. This can push it further. It's basically, a couple of things happen, right? If there's at the bottom, with toxins and bad food, of course, there's many other things that can contribute to this, but excessive glucose and excessive fatty acids can lead to this inflammasome activation, this excessive activation of the immune system, and this can lead to pancreatic islet cells inflammation. Basically, the little cells inside the pancreas. There's the alpha cells and the beta cells. The beta cells are what create insulin, right? And this is all related to insulin resistance, and this is what eventually causes failure of the pancreas and causes prediabetes and diabetes, right? So that's what these islet cells are. And what can happen is they become inflamed, and they can undergo apoptosis. They start to die, and that's not what you want. And eventually, when enough of them go, your pancreas is not working properly, and then you can get diabetes, right? It leads to beta cell failure. That's what, again, causes basically now you're diabetic, and it's all backed up, and you start in the beginning because of inflammation, insulin resistance, and what came first, the chicken and egg. And I'll talk about this in future videos, but insulin resistance is at the root cause of a lot of this, and that's what starts us all. A lot of times this is what happens first. We don't even know it unless you know what to look for, and this can go on for years. And I'll talk about in future videos, a lot of people who have diabetes and metabolic syndrome, they've had insulin resistance for 10 to 20 years. and it's just been festering, and then now boom, the final thing, and now it can take it. Why? Because of this. Eventually this is causing the cells of the pancreas to go bad. They're getting inflamed, they're undergoing apoptosis, and as I said in the beginning, your body can keep up for a while, but eventually it can't. Things start to break down, insulin resistance, eventually the blood sugars start going up, eventually more inflammatory markers go up, and then boom, you're in trouble. So cytokines, these anti-inflammatory cytokines like IL-1 beta, TNF alpha, which I'll talk about, this is the next step, right? So basically too much bad stuff, right? Or just too much a good thing, right? If you're just eating too darn much, too much simple sugar, too many fats, you're pushing the limit, and you're causing this inflammasome activation. Some of these things can cause further inflammatory cytokine production, and these is a 1-2 punch to damage your pancreas and damage other cells in your body too. So a lot of it just comes down to overfeeding, overnutrition, and as well as bad food choices, right? Even if you're just eating quote unquote healthy, if you're eating just too damn much, you can still have too much. This is why people who, for example, are doing keto for years and years get in trouble. Too much fat for a long period of time can cause microbiome disturbances, can cause inflammation, can cause cardiovascular problems. That's why it's important to rotate in and out of dietary strategies. And everything works for a period of time, but then you got to rotate in and out of it. Again, too much sugar, right? If you're eating way too much sugar, again, we talk about, reducing that and reducing your insulin resistance by fasting, by a dietary modification, and the proper nutritional strategies, all these things. So a lot of things we'll talk about in the future, but this is why inflammation has been a big component. There's been a lot of studies on how we can reduce this inflammation, right? The Canto study talked about, Big Pharma tried to create this cool drug, the IL-1 beta antagonist, to reduce inflammation, right? Well, it worked for a while, then it stopped working, and it was massively expensive. So again, we all try to do things as simply as we can. We want to reduce inflammation. We don't need this whiz-bang pharmaceutical synthetic drug. We can do it with things that are by natural makes, like hormones, like dietary modification, like exercise, like fasting, and I'll talk about that in the future videos. So this is a segue. So this is a little bit of a longer one, so hopefully that made sense. And again, it all starts with the inflammatory process, and then we're going to talk about why, and then we're going to dig deeper into the lipids and what we can do about it. So anyway, I hope you like this, and tag this post, share with your friends, reach out to me, let me know what else you want me to talk about and how else I can help. I'm doing telemedicine all across the country. Reach out to me if you want to do a consultation. Remember, everybody live to give. Do something kind, do something good for someone, pass it forward, let them pass it forward to other people, so we can make this a better world for us and for our children to grow up in. Everyone have an awesome week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.